time horror. Enjoy our spine-chilling stories as you sleep, commute, or relax. If you're new, hit subscribe and share with friends and family. Let us know in the comments how we can improve. Our stories are best experienced with headphones on. Now, let's dive into today's tale.
A Solitary Night, True Horror Story of Survival. Chapter 1, The Arrival. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the deserted forest road, Emily tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The old rusted sign pointing to Lakewood Lodge barely stood out against the encroaching darkness. She hadn't planned on making this trip alone, but circumstances forced her hand. Her friend's last-minute cancellations left her with the daunting task of spending a night at the supposedly haunted lodge all by herself. The lodge, nestled deep in the heart of the woods, was notorious for its gruesome history. A series of unexplained disappearances, eerie sightings, and bone-chilling legends had earned it a reputation that both intrigued and terrified. Emily, a budding journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, couldn't resist the lure of uncovering the truth. As she parked her car and stepped out, the air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped her. The crunch of her footsteps on the gravel path seemed unnaturally loud. The lodge loomed ahead, its dark silhouette a stark contrast against the moonlit sky. The windows, broken and lifeless, seemed like the hollow eyes of a long-forgotten giant. Pushing the heavy, creaking door open, Emily was met with a musty smell that hinted at decades of neglect. Cobwebs draped the corners, and dust particles danced in a beam of her flashlight. She set up her equipment, cameras, recorders, and her trusty notebook, ready to document any paranormal activity. As the hours dragged on, Emily began to feel a growing sense of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows seemed to move, and the air grew increasingly oppressive. Just as she was about to dismiss it as her imagination, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, sending her heart racing. Clutching her flashlight, she cautiously made her way toward the sound. Her breath caught in her throat as she rounded the corner and saw the source of the noise. A picture frame once hanging on the wall, now shattered on the floor. But what sent shivers down her spine was the image it held. It was a photograph of the lodge, taken decades ago, with a group of people standing in front of it. In the background, partially obscured, was a shadowy figure that seemed to be staring directly at her. Chapter 2. The first encounter. Emily's pulse raced as she examined the photograph. The name scribbled on the back, Jonathan Harker, sent a chill down her spine. She remembered reading about Jonathan, a man who vanished without a trace after visiting the lodge decades ago. Determined to uncover the mystery, she decided to investigate further. As Emily wandered through the dimly lit corridors, the strange noises grew louder and more distinct. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, but every time she turned, there was no one there. The cold drafts that brushed against her skin felt almost deliberate, as if unseen hands were reaching out to touch her. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and a heavy, oppressive presence filled the air. Emily's breath fogged in the frigid atmosphere. Her flashlight flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. Panic surged through her as she fumbled to turn it back on. When the light finally flickered back to life, she gasped. Standing before her was a ghostly figure. A translucent man dressed in old-fashioned clothes. His eyes, hollow and sorrowful, locked onto hers. "Leave this place," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "You are in grave danger." Before Emily could respond, the figure vanished, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence. Trembling, she stumbled back to the main hall. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. The name Jonathan Harker was her only clue, and she was determined to find out what had happened to him. Chapter 3. The Hidden Room. The chilling encounter with the ghostly figure left Emily more determined than ever. She delved into the history of Jonathan Harker, piecing together snippets of information from old articles and documents scattered throughout the lodge. It became clear that Jonathan had been investigating the lodge's dark past, much like she was now. While exploring a dusty library, Emily noticed something odd about one of the bookshelves. The air around it felt colder, and a faint draft seemed to emanate from behind the books. Intrigued, she began pulling books off the shelf. With a creak and a groan, the bookshelf slowly swung open, revealing a hidden door. Behind the door was a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and decay. Emily's flashlight beam danced across the room, illuminating old journals, photographs, and disturbing artifacts. It was as if the room had been preserved in time, untouched for decades. She picked up one of the journals and began reading. The entries detailed the horrific experiences of previous visitors to the lodge, people who had vanished without a trace. They described eerie sightings, terrifying noises, and a malevolent presence that seemed to feed off their fear. As Emily read on, she learned about the lodge's dark origins. It was built on land that had been the site of a gruesome massacre. The spirits of those who perished were trapped, tormented by a malevolent entity that had taken root in the lodge. The journal spoke of rituals and sacrifices, and a desperate attempt to banish the entity that had ultimately failed. A shiver ran down Emily's spine as she realized the extent of the danger she was in. The malevolent spirit was not just any ghost. It was a powerful force that thrived on fear and suffering, and now it had set its sights on her. Chapter 4. The Unwelcome Arrival. Emily's heart raced as she absorbed the chilling revelations from the journals. Suddenly, a loud knock at the lodge's front door jolted her from her thoughts. She hesitated, her mind racing with the possibilities of who or what could be at the door. Mustering her courage, she approached and cautiously opened it. To her surprise, her friends, Mark, Lisa, and Daniel, stood on the porch, looking both relieved and apprehensive. "We couldn't let you do this alone," Mark said, his voice trembling slightly. "We decided to join you, after all." Relief washed over Emily, but a nagging sense of unease lingered. She quickly briefed them on her discoveries, and together they began to explore the lodge more thoroughly. As the night deepened, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The shadows seemed to writhe and whisper, and the temperature continued to drop. The group decided to split up to cover more ground despite their mounting fear. Emily and Lisa headed upstairs, while Mark and Daniel explored the basement. As Emily and Lisa ascended the creaking staircase, they heard faint, ghostly laughter echoing through the halls. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, Emily found another journal, this one belonging to Jonathan Harker. It detailed his own encounters with the malevolent spirit and his desperate attempts to uncover the truth. As she read on, a horrifying realization dawned on her. Jonathan's notes mentioned a personal connection to the lodge's history, a connection that mirrored her own family name. Before she could process this revelation, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the basement. Emily and Lisa rushed downstairs, their hearts pounding. They found Mark and Daniel in a state of shock, staring at a hidden passage that had been revealed in the basement wall. The passage led to an underground chamber where the air was thick with the stench of decay. The walls were lined with strange, occult symbols, and in the center of the room lay a dusty, old chest. As they approached the chest, Emily's mind raced with questions. What horrors lay within? And what connection did the lodge have to her own family? With trembling hands, she opened the chest, revealing a collection of ancient, sinister artifacts. Among them was a faded photograph of a family, her family. The realization hit her like a sledgehammer. The malevolent spirit haunting the lodge was somehow connected to her own bloodline. Chapter 5. The Descent. Emily's mind raced with questions as she stared at the photograph of her family. The connection between her bloodline and the malevolent spirit was undeniable, but the details remained shrouded in mystery. Determined to uncover the truth, she carefully examined the other artifacts in the chest, hoping to find more clues. As she sifted through the items, the air grew colder, and the oppressive presence returned. The shadows seemed to close in around them, and a sense of dread settled over the group. Emily knew they had to act quickly before the spirit grew even more powerful. The hidden passage led deeper underground, and the group decided to explore it, hoping to find a way to stop the spirit once and for all. The walls of the passage were lined with eerie symbols, and the floor was slick with moisture. The further they descended, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Suddenly they heard a blood-curdling scream from behind them. Emily spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Mark was gone. Panic surged through the group as they called out his name, their voices echoing in the narrow passage. But there was no response, only the haunting silence. Desperation set in as they continued deeper into the underground chamber. The passage opened into a vast cavern where the air was thick with the stench of decay. In the center of the cavern stood an ancient altar covered in strange, glowing symbols. The walls were lined with eerie, flickering torches that cast unsettling shadows. Emily's eyes were drawn to a large, ornate mirror standing against one of the cavern walls. As she approached it, her reflection seemed to twist and warp, taking on a malevolent grin. She realized with a sinking feeling that the spirit was playing with her mind, trying to break her resolve. Just as she was about to turn away, she caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. Mark's face appeared, twisted in agony, as if he were trapped within the glass. The sight filled her with dread, but also with determination. She had to find a way to save him. Chapter 6. The Bloodline Connection. The sight of Mark's agonized face in the mirror filled Emily with a mix of fear and determination. She knew she had to find a way to free him and stop the malevolent spirit once and for all. As she studied the glowing symbols on the altar, a disturbing realization dawned on her. These symbols were part of an ancient ritual meant to bind the spirit to the lodge. Just then, Lisa let out a gasp. She had found another journal hidden among the artifacts. This journal belonged to one of Emily's ancestors, a woman named Eliza Blackwood. Eliza had been part of the original group that built the lodge, and her journal revealed shocking truths about the spirit's origin. According to the journal, Eliza and her companions had performed a forbidden ritual to summon a powerful entity, hoping to gain its favor and harness its power. But the ritual had gone horribly wrong, resulting in the massacre and the entity becoming bound to the lodge. Eliza had tried to stop the ritual, but it was too late. The entity had taken root, feeding on the fear and suffering of those who entered the lodge. The journal also revealed a way to banish the spirit by performing a counter-ritual that required a sacrifice. Emily's heart sank as she realized the gravity of the situation. To save her friends and put an end to the spirit's reign of terror, she would have to make a terrible choice. As Emily shared the findings with Lisa and Daniel, the oppressive presence grew stronger. The spirit's anger was palpable, and it began to lash out with renewed fury. Shadows writhed and twisted, and the temperature plummeted even further. In the chaos, Daniel revealed a shocking secret. He had known about the lodge's history all along and had a personal connection to it. His great-grandfather had been one of the original summoners, and Daniel had come to the lodge hoping to redeem his family's name. He had kept this from Emily, fearing her reaction. The revelation stunned Emily, but there was no time for anger or blame. They had to act quickly. Emily decided to perform the counter-ritual, but she knew the sacrifice required was more than she could bear. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. Emily's heart pounded as she prepared for the counter-ritual. The realization that the sacrifice required was not merely an object, but something far more precious. Someone's life pressed heavily on her. The weight of the decision was almost unbearable, but there was no other way to end the spirit's reign of terror. As Emily, Lisa, and Daniel gathered around the ancient altar, the malevolent presence grew stronger. Shadows writhed, twisted, and a bone-chilling cold enveloped them. The spirit's anger was palpable, and it lashed out with violent force. Objects flew through the air, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. Emily began the incantation, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The symbols on the altar glowed brighter, casting an eerie light over the cavern. The spirit's rage intensified, and it manifested as a swirling, dark vortex in the center of the room. The air crackled with energy, and the oppressive atmosphere grew thicker, almost suffocating. As she chanted, Emily's mind raced with memories of the night. Lisa's laughter, Mark's determination, Daniel's secret, the bond they had forged in the face of terror made the thought of a sacrifice even more harrowing. But she knew that this was their only chance to end the nightmare. Just as Emily reached the final part of the ritual, the spirit attacked. It lashed out at Lisa, pulling her toward the vortex. Emily and Daniel fought desperately to save her, their voices hoarse from screaming, but the spirit's strength was overwhelming. In a moment of sheer horror, Lisa was pulled into the vortex, her screams echoing through the cavern. The spirit's fury seemed to reach its peak, and the ground shook violently. Rocks and debris fell from the cavern ceiling, narrowly missing Emily and Daniel. But Emily pressed on, determined to complete the ritual. She chanted the final words, her voice rising above the chaos, and a blinding light erupted from the altar. The vortex began to collapse in on itself, the dark, swirling mass drawing inward with a deafening roar. The spirit's anguished howl filled the air, a sound that seemed to pierce through Emily's very soul. The light grew brighter, illuminating every corner of the cavern. and the oppressive presence began to weaken. Emily's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: grief, determination, fear. She clung to the hope that the ritual would work, that Lisa's sacrifice would not be in vain. The spirit's howls grew fainter, and the vortex continued to shrink, pulling the malevolent entity into its depths. With a final, powerful word, Emily completed the ritual. The blinding light intensified, and the cavern shook with an earth-shattering force. The vortex collapsed entirely, and the spirit was sucked into the void, its presence vanishing in an instant. The ground steadied, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Emily and Daniel collapsed to the floor, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. They had done it. The spirit was banished, and the nightmare was over. But the cost was immense. Lisa was gone, and the trauma of the night would linger with them forever. As they lay there, catching their breath, Emily knew that the ordeal had left an indelible mark on her. The memories of Lakewood Lodge, the malevolent spirit, and the friends she had lost would haunt her for the rest of her life. But she also knew that she had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. Emily and Daniel emerged from the ruins of Lakewood Lodge, their bodies battered and souls weary. The crisp night air bit at their skin, but it was a welcome change from the suffocating, oppressive atmosphere inside the lodge. They stumbled to the car, every step a reminder of the horrors they had faced and the friend they had lost. Back in civilization, Emily couldn't shake the memories of the lodge. Every creak of her apartment floor, every gust of wind outside her window sent her heart racing. She sought solace in therapy, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. But the memories were like deep scars, always present, always painful. Determined to make sense of what had happened, Emily threw herself into her writing. Her book, A Solitary Night, became a national bestseller, captivating readers with its haunting tale of survival. But no amount of success could erase the images burned into her mind: the twisted grin in the mirror, Lisa's screams, the malevolent spirit's suffocating presence. Despite the therapy and the support of her loved ones, Emily felt the spirit's lingering presence. It was as if the entity had left a part of itself with her, an invisible shadow that followed her every move. She became hyper-vigilant, always looking over her shoulder, always listening for the faintest sign of the spirit's return. One evening, as she sat at her desk, trying to write a new chapter in her life, she felt the familiar chill. The air around her grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over her. She turned slowly, her eyes falling on the mirror from the lodge, now hanging on her wall. Her reflection stared back at her, but there was something off, a faint, malevolent grin that sent shivers down her spine. Emily's heart raced as she realized the spirit had not been fully banished. It had followed her, waiting in the shadows, biding its time. The oppressive presence grew stronger, and she knew she had to confront it once and for all. With the trembling hands, she approached the mirror, determined to end the nightmare. She reached out and touched the cold glass surface, her breath fogging up the mirror. As she did, the room around her seemed to twist and warp, the shadows growing darker, more sinister. The malevolent spirit's presence was almost tangible, a weight pressing down on her chest. In a flash of insight, Emily remembered the counter-ritual from Eliza's journal. The sacrifice had been made, but perhaps there was another step, something she had missed. Desperate for answers, she rifled through her notes, searching for any clue, any hint that could help her banish the spirit once and for all. As she read through the journal again, a passage caught her eye. A final incantation, a binding spell that could trap the spirit within the mirror. Her heart pounded as she realized this was her chance. She began to chant the incantation, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. The mirror's surface began to ripple and distort, the malevolent grin twisting and turning. The room shook, and the oppressive presence grew stronger, but Emily kept chanting, her voice growing louder, more confident. The spirit's anguished howl filled the air, but she pressed on, determined to see the ritual through. With a final, powerful word, the mirror shattered, sending shards of glass flying through the air. The oppressive presence vanished, and the room fell silent. Emily collapsed to the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The spirit was gone, trapped within the shattered remnants of the mirror. As she lay there catching her breath, Emily knew the ordeal had left its mark on her. The trauma would always be a part of her, but she had faced her fears and emerged victorious. The malevolent spirit was finally banished, and she could begin to heal. Emily returned to her writing, using her experiences to craft stories that captivated and inspired. Her book, A Solitary Night, remained a bestseller, a testament to her resilience and determination. And though the memories of the lodge would never fade, she knew she had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead.
If you're new, hit subscribe and share with